Wherever you are, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, because we've got colleagues joining us from around the world today. I'm sitting here in the Supply Chain Academy studios over in London, and we've got a great presentation for you today. So today, our webinar is on strengthening your supply chain with military-informed risk and success management, particularly with cybersecurity and how cybersecurity sits across the end-to-end supply chain. My name is Alex Mortimer. I'm delighted to be hosting this conversation today on behalf of the Supply Chain Academy. But to give you a bit of context, I mean, now more than ever, supply chains are under pressure from global disruptions and cybersecurity threats to volatile demand and resource constraints. But there are valuable lessons to be learned from one of the most operationally tested and resilient institutions in the world, the military. So with that in mind, I'm honoured to introduce our guest today, Colonel Chris Starling. Just a little bit of a background for Chris. Chris is a highly experienced US Marine Corps officer with a distinguished career in military operations, leadership, strategic planning, and risk management. He's now bringing those battlefield insights into the boardroom, helping businesses rethink how they plan, prepare, and perform under pressure. Chris, it's a real pleasure to have you today. I remember seeing you in Congress in DC last year, being scrutinized by the committee. And I thought to myself, man, that guy is tough. You're tough. And we were I was very fortunate to meet you in person in Dallas last year. And we've been friends for a while. And also we presented together on a panel, ironically later, to 300 military folk, veterans, as they wanted to try and transition into civilian roles. It's wonderful to have you here. Thank you so much for being part of this presentation today. Tell the audience who you are and what you're about, and then we'll kick off with some of the interview questions.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Pleasure to be here. Chris Starling. I'm a retired Marine colonel, so that's, I'm still on a retainer. I think, once you get a retirement check, they can call you back, but fortunately that hasn't happened yet. I left the Marine Corps actually in 2014, and I ended up in a place. I was an infantryman for 26 years. I commanded a Marine infantry battalion and a Marine regiment. I served in a lot of staff positions. I got to teach at West Point. I was the partnership chief at U.S. Africa Command. I had a bunch of really great jobs on active duty, and I was on active duty as we started to go from using paper and pen to having computers and spreadsheets and actually worrying about cybersecurity, and followed that along. When I got out, training veterans in technology, because especially cybersecurity is what my passion is, because if you can fight on physical terrain, you can fight in the virtual domain. It's much the same warrior spirit that needs to be in there. You defend the nation, protect the network. Right. And then there's an offensive capability that I won't go into necessarily here, because we're talking about protecting our networks. But sometimes we all know that a good defense is a good offense. So that's my background. I've lived all over the world. I did 10 deployments overseas, 3 combat tours. And I live in San Francisco now, right near Silicon Valley. And really a pleasure to be here with everyone today.
That's great. So is that where you are today, over in San Francisco?
Yes.
Yeah, weather all right?
Yeah, it's always a bit chilly. The October is good in San Francisco, but you walk outside in June and it's probably going to be 60 degrees with some wind whipping around. But we have some nice days here too.
Yeah, you certainly do. Thank you so much again for being part of this. Let's kick off with the questions. So the first question is: we've talked a lot about supply chains together. In the military, you've used decentralized command and control to great effect. How can that principle be applied to supply chain teams to improve responsiveness and resilience, especially during disruptions?
Yeah, I think first you have to look at supply chains and things. They're extensive now. We're dealing with global supply chains. Just about every business, unless you're a small mom and pop shop somewhere, is dealing with national or global supply chains. So they're huge. And there are a lot of military parallels as you're planning logistics for the Pacific Theater. Whenever the United States is in a conflict, it's normally an away game. We have to figure out how we're going to get critical supplies to places, and those critical supplies usually move on boats or planes that don't have guns on them. They are soft targets. And so civilian businesses have the same issues. And I think some of the things that, the military application isn't an end all be all, but there are some things that I would apply right away. One is, empowering local decision making, right? Junior leaders need to know what the intent of the leader is, and making decisions, being empowered to make decisions. Walmart's a great example. Walmart has trucks out there and moving with supplies, and if San Antonio is short on Head and Shoulders shampoo, they're able to vector that truck that was on its way to Houston. It'll turn off and go to San Antonio because there are leaders that are empowered at that level to make those decisions. And then going back to the leadership, having strategic clarity on what it is that you're doing, and understanding not just the what you're doing, but why you are doing it. In the military, we call that commander's intent. If I get a mission to destroy a bridge in order to prevent enemy armor units from crossing that river, and I show up and I destroy the bridge, but I see the enemy building a pontoon bridge 400 yards upstream. Well, the implied task force is I need to take that down too, because the commander's intent is not just take care of that bridge. And that's an important distinction, because telling somebody what to do and then not having the purpose behind the task, that's, I think, really important. And then shared situational awareness. We use this term all the time in the military, is how do you maintain situational awareness without micromanaging your people, making them report to you at all times, right? What are the systems that you had? It was really cool when we went to Iraq. It was the first time we really had, in 2003, in the march up to Baghdad, just about every vehicle had what's called Blue Force Tracker in it. Compared to the first Persian Gulf War that I was in, I was a heavy machine gun anti-armor platoon commander. I had a system called the Loran with the antenna that had to stick out. It gave me my latitude and longitude, which I had to find a really smart sergeant to turn that latitude and longitude into an 8-digit grid, which is what we navigate off of and what we call for fire on. So I had a system that gave me latitude and longitude that we had to switch to grid, which took time. But in 2003, we had Blue Force trackers, and you could see where your friendlies were, right? Very quickly. Now we have an even more sophisticated system that can tell us what is enemy and what is unknown. But having situational awareness, where am I? Where's the adversary? Where's my equipment? Where are my things? And there, as we talk about the Internet of Things and being able to track things, it's a lot easier now. But keeping situational awareness so that, leadership can also understand, what is happening at the ground level. So those are three things. And then, you've got to have some kind of contingency protocols. If this, what happens? And we're probably going to talk about that a little bit more later. How do you prepare yourself to handle contingencies? And that's just having playbooks and everyone kind of coming from the same place. It's like a good football team or rugby team. I was a rugby player and a rugby coach for many years. And it's those basic drills that we do, if someone, if they're likely to kick or if they're likely to run at your centers all the time. I'm trying to use European examples here, as an American. I'm not going to American football. I'm really proud of myself. But what are the contingency plans? How do we tighten things up, or how do we understand what that threat is and set ourselves up for success there? So, those would be my answers to that question. And,
that's great. Faith, what actually quite nicely links up to my second question. Through one of the most kind of intriguing military planning tools is wargaming, and we talked a little bit about this offline. So from that kind of perspective, what does a successful wargame look like in a business context, and how can companies start incorporating it into their business planning cycles?
Yeah. So wargaming, very, very important in military operations. And I think in civilian areas too. Um, Let me first describe a little bit how the military approaches wargaming, right? And this is going to be different than how I think civilian businesses do it a lot. But I think it's worth it to look at the military model a little bit. We have different levels of warfare, right? And there's the strategic level, grand strategy. That stuff happens at the National Security Council, at the highest levels of our respective governments, right? Is what is the strategy? And is this, and a lot of times it's surprising, the strategies, national strategies are not even sound. And then you have the operational level of war that takes you on the ground, and you're talking about, the corps level and division level operational imperatives, what needs to happen on the ground. I spent 2 years of my life in Iraq, and some of our strategic imperatives were things like, hey, we need to build up the Iraqi police force and the army. And I don't think we ever got to where we needed to be with that. So that was a great operational imperative. But it was very hard to get to, based on what we had. And then there's the tactical level, right? And at the tactical level, that is, putting a magazine in a weapon, patrolling the streets, trying to do no harm, trying to bring the local economies up to speed, and to win hearts and minds. That's what you're doing on the tactical level. And I think every business has a strategic and operational and tactical level to it, and it's up to us to figure out, where does one start and the other one begin, or where does one stop and the other begin. So I think that is really important. Strategic war games are on those high level alliances, stakeholder partners, long-term outcomes, right? The operational is what we look at for campaigns and for theater planning, and for logistics and supply chain. It's like, what's the flow of goods? What's the timing of the logistics? How are those coordinated? I've been in camps before where, it's one thing, if you don't have a field jacket or whatever. It's another thing when you run out of coffee. You want to see a place go into complete panic mode. It's like there's no coffee for the next week, upon which all military planning depends. So that's the operational piece. And then the tactical piece is the day-to-day things. And for you in the business world, that's, warehouse stuff. What happens if the warehouse shuts down? What if there's a problem what if there's a truckers strike, or what if there's a software outage somewhere that just stops things? And those are decisions that young people generally have to respond to, and try and get things going. Another thing we do in the military a lot is tabletop exercises. We'll take, a scenario, or, we're not going to be so technical as to have simulations, but we're looking at, okay, if this happens, how does that impact our supply chain? It was really important to us in Iraq? Lawyers. Before we were allowed to strike a target with air power, we had to bring a lawyer into the command operations center and have him bless off on the fact that that was a hostile act or a hostile intent that was taking place. This is bizarro and strange. In all of my military life, leading up to when I was a lieutenant colonel, when this kind of policy started, we had to have the judge advocate in a little, that guy couldn't even sleep more than 20 meters away from us. We go grab him and say, hey, we got a troops in contact situation. We got a hostile act, hostile intent. Got it. And that's the same for supply chain and the civilian play. Lawyers play a huge role in all these things. And then, of course, communication. So, what are the legal implications? What are the transportation implications and that thing? The last thing I'll say about wargaming, and this was my favorite thing, is red teaming. Red teaming was great, and I love being on the red team, right? Whether that is for a the Russian motorized rifle regiment when I was a young lieutenant, and the Soviet Union was our most likely threat, to what do insurgents do? How are they going to use improvised explosive devices or drones to mess up our supply chain, our supplies coming forward? They knew we were fuel we were fuel dependent in Iraq. That's a huge country. I had about 3,000 Marines to cover down on an area the size of South Carolina. It's a huge battle space, and we were relying on vehicles and fuels. Our critical vulnerability was our fuel supply, and we knew it. And so for business, it's the same thing. What is it? Is it competitors that are messing with you? Is it hackers? Is it regulators? How do you stress test your plans? And with a red cell, you go in there and do that. My favorite red cell story, if you look this up online, Millennium Challenge, it was right around just after 2000. There was a war game called Millennium Challenge where the U.S. Navy and Department of Defense were like, okay, we're going to pretend that Iran is cutting off the Straits of Hormuz, and we're going to go open it with American military power. And they picked this guy, General Paul Van Riper, to be the red cell leader. And they started the war game, and within about 2.5 hours, most of the Pacific Fleet was at the bottom of the sound there. Most of our the Marsent naval assets had been hit and sunk by basically the equivalent of drone boats, suicide torpedo boats, swarms of small boats that came out into the Straits of Hormuz, and we couldn't shoot them all fast enough in the game simulation. And so the Department of Defense canceled the game, reset everything, and said, oh, that would never happen. And then they redid the game where they could win. And General Van Riper went public, and he wrote about this. And I always admired his courage and his candid remarks on, when you do a war game, you can't just hit Control Alt Delete and let's do it again so we win. But red cell, I think, is something that put yourself in your adversary's shoes, and what would you do to mess up your day?
That's really good advice there. I was going to ask you more about the cybersecurity piece now, because as I said to you offline, I mean, in the UK, I'm sort of seeing a lot more, cyber attacks. We've seen a lot more happening all around the UK and around the world. But then when it affects the supply chain, people are in different levels of maturity within their organization with their understanding. So, you've talked a little bit about kind of tabletop exercises and kind of understanding that, how important communication is, and communication is really important. But from a cybersecurity point of view in the supply chain, what do military leaders kind of if you were a business and you were trying to understand the effects of cybersecurity on the business and their supply chain, what would you do? And what practical advice could you give to our audience today?
Yeah, this is a great question. Because supply chains are mission critical to every business, and increasingly they are digital, they are automated, and sometimes just like we let them run, and we know prime targets. Just like I said, our fuel trucks were really big targets in Iraq. Your networks are they are targets for attackers that are trying to disrupt or to somehow get financial gain, like the ransom examples that you shared. And so, what do you do for that? One, you've got an extended ecosystem of systems, and so how can you secure those extended ecosystems? For the military, right? That involves defense contractors, right? When you look at the whole WikiLeaks scandal that happened, it was a young man who was a defense contractor who took a thumb drive in and pulled a bunch of stuff out. Now, that wasn't necessarily a cyber attack. That was but it was a digital attack, right? So, but who are your vendors? Who are your logistics partners and software providers, right? And by wargaming and red selling those, where are the dangers there? A lot of times it's access, right? It's who has access and how do they have access, right? So doing a cybersecurity risk assessment for all your vendors or anybody that touches your systems, right? Making sure that you have the right security certifications for your critical suppliers. There's a contract aspect of this and making sure everybody understands what the security standards are. I know that right now I'm training some active duty military and some veterans in cyber compliance because the DoD just revamped a bunch of cyber rules, and they're going to need to have people that enforce compliance with that. And then, third-party risk management platforms are also an option. Some organizations can and some can't do a zero trust architecture, right? You can't assume that any user is trustworthy inside or outside your network. A good friend of mine, he was a lieutenant when we were stationed in Hawaii together. He was one of my second lieutenants that checked into my company. Kevin Burton, he went in the Marine Corps, then FBI, and he landed a really great job at Capital One Bank, but he does insider threat prevention and investigations. So you can't assume that users or people on your system are trustworthy. And so limiting access to also in the military, we call this a need to know basis. Who has access to what? How do you limit that access to things? And then this also goes back to the basic authentication and verification. The other part is a no-brainer. I'm sure you're all doing it, is educating the workforce, right? And one of the things that we have where I work is, whenever you get an email or a message of any kind, it's like, just take 9 seconds and kind of review it. Quickly look at, who's the sender? Is that their actual real address? Because we've all been spoofed. We've all been, hey, it's, and it says, CEO of insert your company name. CEO, hey, I need you to check this out and get back to me within 15 minutes about this brief. And it's a link. And then you'll go to the CEO's address. Well, that's not her name, dot whatever at my company. That's some other weird thing in there. And it's just we're constantly bombarded with these, phishing attacks or various nefarious programs trying to get access or trying to get us to click on something that will give somebody access. I hope that answered the question.
It does answer the question. In fact, Chris, I didn't tell you this. Yesterday, I was with a CEO of a major construction company in the UK, quite well known. I'm not going to mention the names or the brand, but they actually, at the same time that I was there, had a cyber attack, and the AI replicated the voice of the CEO, and they almost parted cash and gave cash out. They just double checked something with the finance director. And unfortunately for them, they didn't give the money to the intruder, or whatever it is you want to call them now. I'm using kind of other language now for this audience, but people just don't realise or appreciate how these attacks can happen, and particularly again through a supply chain or through different vulnerabilities across the supply chain. So my next question is going to link quite nicely to this, as if we didn't plan this already, Chris. But I want to link in the warfighter mindset. You talked a lot in the past, particularly with me, about what we often hear about that warfighter mindset, and linking that to how maybe in a culture and an organization we need people to not only understand the basics around risk assessments, making sure that you audit your suppliers properly, but how do you make sure that we're all in a battle? We're fighting these attackers, aren't we, all the time? But we don't actually realise that. So what does that actually really mean? So when I say a warfighter mindset, what does that really mean in the business world? And how can leaders step up and cultivate that mindset in their teams as well, particularly in high pressure environments? Because supply chain is a very high pressure, not in your world, in the military, right? That's high pressure, but for a supply chain, in our world, there is that high pressure of getting the goods out the door, out of the warehouse, straight to customer, or another distribution center. So how does that work then for having a warfighter mindset?
Yeah, and that also begs the question, is a warfighter something that somebody already kind of is that, or can they be trained in that? I believe they can be trained in it, but there's also, there are those of us who, going through school, joined the drama club, And then there's people like me that have probably extra thickness on their skull that went when played games like rugby. You know, I enjoyed that physical contact of physical sports, and there was always kind of a warfighter mentality in you know, growing up among the kids that I played with. And I'm dating myself back to the 70s and 80s. It was a great time to be a kid and just go out and play pickup ball, whatever, in the backyard. But in the business world and cybersecurity, it means you're a frontline defender, and that means you're vigilant every day. There's a great movie I saw, I forget which, but there was a great line in it. Just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you, right? Yeah, vigilance. You're adaptive to things that are happening. You have a mission drive, and hey, you're ready to be in that really highly contested, high stakes environment, right? You don't shy away from that. And, you know, complacency kills is another thing we would say out in the operating in the military operating environment. But you have to treat cyber as a battle space. And, you know, it's not just an IT function that, oh, yeah, I got to go through this. It's really, really serious. And so the mindset is, you know, the mindset of the warriors, the mission comes first, right? We'll be in the attack and you'll take casualties. You can't stop with every casualty and go, oh, man, hey, are you okay? If somebody goes down next to you, there are some medics, team of medics right behind that are going to come down, you know, and take care of people. You have to keep pushing toward that, whatever that objective is. And so the mission first is protecting the critical systems and data. And that's above everything else. You know that breaches are inevitable and they're going to happen. It's just a matter of when. So you've got to defend and constantly detect these things continuously. You know that your adversary is going to change their tactics and procedures. When they get blocked by something, they're going to try and find another way. One of my favorite books that I've ever read was The Cuckoo's Egg. It's about the very first cybersecurity attack ever. Cliff Stoll is the guy who wrote it. I recommend it. It's a great book about some guy who works at Cal Berkeley, and he's got to find a 25-cent rounding error. That why did we have this extra charges on our phone back when we plugged in modems and stuff? And it's a fascinating book. It's called The Cuckoo's Egg. But if you want to read about the origins of the first international cyber attack, that's it. Breaches are inevitable, and tactics, techniques, and procedures are going to change. There's a discipline aspect of, like I said, we have a program called Take 9. Take 9 seconds and just take a look at what email you're getting. If it's from a new person or it's not, you don't recognize something, just 9 seconds on each one. And that's a discipline action that my team and we do whenever we get something from an unknown source, right? Situational awareness I talked about, having that real-time visibility into your networks and what threats are there, what unusual things are you seeing. And, the offense really shapes or informs what the defense does, right? Understanding adversary behavior. What I like about what you do, Alex, is you study all these things, the McDonald's thing, the Marks and Spencer thing. Like, okay, that happened. What do we learn from it, right? And how do we have a little huddle and say, okay, how do we make sure this thing doesn't happen to us? Because, we do that in the military as well. Hey, if 3rd Battalion, 2nd Marines got hit hard somewhere, or they were ambushed on a road, it's like, okay, these guys use pressure plates. How do we, or they use the command detonated idea. How do we avoid doing the same thing? And so then it's incumbent upon business leaders to put that mindset into people. That's the training part, right? Making cyber security a priority, not just the IT guy's problem, but it's everybody's issue that works there. And, if you're the CEO of a company, when you're making decisions, you should probably have your CISO, your Chief Information Security Officer, arm's length away from you, and treat cyber risks the same way you would treat a burglary. People, sneaking in your office window at night and stealing your stuff. It's the same importance as physical security. So I could talk more about that. I think the one other thing I would say is, like, in the military, we do training and drills. If this happened, what would we do? Again, the having a regular training process um, is good. And when somebody does something well, recognize them, right? If somebody finds something or prevents something from happening, make that a big deal. I used to love, as a Marine, pulling a Marine out in front of my formation. And, as a regimental commander, I had the authority to present medals, impact medals, real ones you could wear on your chest. And, a staff sergeant told me a long time ago in the military, I was going to write a letter of appreciation to a Marine. So I wrote this really nice letter of appreciation, and Staff Sergeant Runner told me, "Hey, sir, if you can't wear it on your chest or it doesn't increase your pay, you can wipe your ass with it." And I never, it's probably one of the best leadership lessons I ever learned. Was like, gosh dang, that came from a staff sergeant to a second lieutenant. And I never forgot it. But if you can recognize somebody with, whether it's a bonus or something good, not just a, hey, pat on the back, that means a lot to people. And cyber should be one of those areas where we recognize people. So that was a long answer to a really short question.
No, well, I think my question was pretty long anyway, to be fair. But your answer was very, very encouraging. And actually, I've got a few points which I'm going to kind of recap at the end of the presentation. But it leads quite nicely to our next 2 points. And I'm going to put the next two questions together, so we can have a little bit of time for Q&A for the folk on the webinar. So a couple of things then, from a contingency planning point of view, right, and from a real-time intelligence point of view, right, both are key in logistics and operations management. How can businesses build redundancies and backup plans into their supply chains without creating inefficiencies or waste? Any point of view from that, from a military point of view?
Well, here's the problem with me answering that question. The military is not that efficient when it comes to supplies and those other things. Civilian businesses are way more efficient. And that's why we hire a lot of contractors to do a lot of things. But what I will say is that when we do staff planning, we don't just write, okay, this is the plan, this is what we're going to do, and then that'll be the end. We do what's called branches and sequels. And you get your best planners together. Sometimes you put them in one room, you lock them in there for, 12 hours or whatever. We can do that kind of physical hazing to people in the military. It's okay. Civilians might, slide pizza under the door, give them enough beverages and whatever, and then come back with a plan of, okay, we've got our main plan we've agreed on. Now, what are the branches, and what about what happens after? What are the sequel plans to that? And those also happen on a strategic, on an operational, on a tactical level. So having backup to your supply chains. I just read a really cool article about, we're looking at China as a military right now. And, they have what's called interior lines, right? If they're going to attack Taiwan, it's very tight for them. We have to send ships, airplanes, fuel, missiles, all this stuff, all the way across the doggone Pacific Ocean. That is a huge burden, right? So, okay, what do? We base things in the Pacific. We have alliances, and they allow us to store our stuff there, whether that's Guam, the Philippines, a few other countries, and we're able to project power that way. But how do we have to come up with some really innovative ways to resupply people. And one of the plans for Marines in a war with China is to be on the first and second island chains with mobile missile launchers to be able to fight the PLN, the PLA Navy, the Chinese Navy. Okay, I read an article where they went, in 9 months, they developed this capability, and they based it off of drug runners, right, from Colombia. They had these like cigarette boats that turn into submarines. So they're these long, thin boats that can then submerge. Not to like 200 feet, but they can submerge enough to be out of sight and, go through the Straits of Malacca that way without being a target, and then pop up and, recharge batteries or do whatever they have to do. But I thought that was a pretty ingenious way to look at your supply chain, of coming up with an innovative way to move things like ammunition, batteries. I mean, with the whole military right now runs off all these batteries. What happens when your night vision goggle batteries go out? We don't have solar powered night vision goggles, right? So there's a huge supply chain issue. And what it is, it's about just studying, innovating, and coming up with efficient ways to do that. But having a backup system, it's like communications too. We always had, I joined the Marine Corps when we were still running wire. We had wiremen, was an actual military occupational specialty. A wireman had huge coils of wire, and they would go and they would hook up your field phone, and then they would wire that thing just like what we had in like World War One and World War Two. The guy would go with his wire and unravel it and plug it into the company command post, the battalion command post, and we would wire in. Man, that's a joke now. We think about that. That's what kids play with. But having a backup comms plan, a tertiary comms plan, it's the same thing. Is there a way to switch to another system, a backup system, like you would have a backup generator? So I hope that answered the question.
No, it certainly does. And I think we're going to go straight into Q&A because I think there's a couple of questions that have come through. So let's start with Simon George. Simon George is our UniServe Group's IT director. And his question is, hi, Chris, what is your perspective on the role of cyber insurance in today's threat landscape? Do you see it as a critical component of a cyber strategy or more of a reactive measure?
Yeah.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Simon.
That's a great question. And hey, it's a personal decision, right? It's like, what's your deductible on your car insurance? Mine, I've always been $1,000 a month person. Like, okay, I'm going to accept this risk. How much risk are you willing to accept? But I think it is. On the large scale, yes, it is. For the great corporations, it's a critical aspect. Cyber insurance is critical. The smaller your organization, you know what? Maybe the more risk that you can accept. But it's an awesome question. But it comes down to, your own mission analysis of what is right for you. I have some friends of mine that collect art, and they have like crazy art insurance. Something happens to their house, and I in my mind, I could never imagine paying for art insurance. But I don't have that much, valuable artwork hanging on my wall. It's mostly sentimental in my house. But I think if for large corporations, yes, that insurance becomes an important piece, because it's almost inevitable that you are going to have some kind of a breach somewhere, and you want as much help as you can in those times. And the smaller you are, like, the less you can afford that kind of thing, and you hope to stay under the radar and not be a major target. But if you're a major target, my personal opinion, and it's always opinion, is that that's probably a good thing to have.
That's great. Thanks so much, Chris. I think there's a question from Adrian Percival. Do you want to come off mute and ask Chris your question? Adrian?
Sorry, terribly sorry. I was trying to find it. I was typing the question versus that of posing it. Do you feel that Expert Shami, so do you think organizations should be far more centric to the base of the operation and listening to the ground, and driving forwards with that, their strategies, rather than looking at data purely?
Yeah, I mean, it's always going to be a mix of both, right? And then, sometimes you're going to have to surge on the data part. And, and it's all about the nature. It's really the nature of your business, right? And when I say that, I mean, you look at the examples of these, different hacks and different things. Criminal enterprises are going to find the softest targets, and they're going to find where they can get away with things. I just read an article last week that in the United States, train robberies are up 40%. Like that shocked me. I didn't even know they did train robberies anymore. I thought that stuff ended like in the, late 1800s, robbing a train. So yeah, at the same time, he who defends everywhere defends nowhere. That's the old Sun Tzu thing, right? And it goes back to having regular, just kind of regular, very quick strategy sessions. Are we doing the right things in the right priorities? And so I think it's going to, in our environment, things are going to change back and forth. Sometimes you're going to have to just, rely on data. But as a military leader, there is nothing as important as senior leadership rubbing elbows with those, those guys at the pointy end of the spear, those guys and gals at the pointy end of the spear that are engaged in things every day, and just getting a pulse check from them, and that will inform your decision making.
That's exactly, I guess what I'm looking for. But can I don't hope you don't mind if I ask a secondary question.
Sure.
How do you believe that AI will influence this?
Man, I was waiting for the AI and the quantum stuff, right? That's coming. Here's how this is. I think number one, AI will affect cyber, but you're always going to need a lot of humans in that loop. The way I look at AI right now is the way I look at the internet back in like the mid 1990s, right? If you understand it, if you embrace it, and if you incorporate it into your workday, you can become a 10x employee instead of a 1x employee, right? You will be able to do more faster, and you'll be able to ride this wave of different platforms. When I interview people now, I ask them, hey, what AI platforms do you use in your personal life or at work? That's a great interview question, and I think it's going to be an interview question all of any person applying for a job is going to get over the next couple of years. But where AI can cover down on some things, that's awesome. But it's, as Alex mentioned too, there's spoofs, there's deep fakes, there's things that once you have AI can be faked out as well. We've got to constantly monitor those things. But I enjoy AI. I really like large language models. If I'm stuck in terms of like writing an email or quickly summarizing some people send me a 6-page email. I'm like, God dang, I can't read all that right now. I like to take it down and give me the summary of what that is. It's very helpful. But AI has the ability to give you courses of action, ideas of like, hey, here's my problem, here's my supply chain. How do I get these things from point A to point B, given these obstacles? And how do I develop redundancy? And it'll give you some ideas. Will it be perfect? Probably not. It's still going to require some creative thinking. But I'm a big fan of the products that are out there right now, whether you have Claude or even if you're just using, I can't use Google right now without, if I type something for a search, it gives me a whole dissertation on stuff, more than I need a lot of times. But no, it's a great question, and we all need to have a certain competency and familiarity, and with AI, it gives us a deeper capacity and more capabilities to do our jobs.
Certainly.
That's great.
Thank you very much indeed for your answer.
Adrian, thanks for your question as well. Do any other colleagues have a question for Chris whilst we have him? Maybe you'll think of a question.
Alex, I could throw one back into the mix in relation to the AI.
Go on, Adrian.
So whilst so I wrote a paper prior to doing IT systems at Sussex University. AI is only as good as the information that we put in, but we could potentially, as individuals, dumb down society by the use of AI and thought process, and then safeguards towards technology diminish, because it's only then controlled by the information that we put in. And the information we put in is generated by individuals using AI.
There's a circle, a cycle.
Cyclic, yes.
Yes, yes.
True. True. And AI goes back and picks up historic things. There are problems with it in terms of, I know that in legal cases, some students at law school would go in and like look for some support for a paper or whatever, and AI would come back with a completely fake legal case, Jones versus Smith, and 1972, and that case never even existed. AI just made it up. So so there are certainly pitfalls with it.
And the reason why I say it is because I know the MOD in UK doesn't allow it. It's something that's sincerely frowned upon, because we want to maintain the best that we have.
Yeah. And I think that as you look at, for our high level people working in the Pentagon and everything else, my sense is they are less around AI, but I will tell you at the lower level, I think it gets used quite a lot for people that have to do repetitive reporting, for people that have to do, plans, training plans, other things like that. But they do so knowing that that there could be some peril in there if you're just cutting and pasting stuff. Everything that you do needs to have a review come of it. And I have a 15-year-old girl right now, and she, confided she uses ChatGPT for, doing work at school and everything else. Totally concerning to me, right? And so we've had to sit down at the dinner table and have some discussions about, hey, when is it appropriate and when is it not? So you make a good point. You can overly rely on AI, and that will lead you down the wrong path. And that's why, especially in cybersecurity, there's some good uses for AI, but it's going to need a lot more human checks and balances than, say, other things.
Yeah, good. Thanks, Chris. Is there any more questions from anyone? All right, let's let people think about the potential questions. Well, I just kind of summarize, if I may, Chris. So we've talked today a lot about risk assessments. We've talked about how procurement and supply chain folk with their vendors and suppliers need to really be vigilant, construct those risk assessments to really consider, and assess, actually, are they the right suppliers, making sure that they're kind of safe. We need to educate our workforce, understanding the basics of cybersecurity, as well as those who want to have a bit more of an in-depth understanding of it as well, and really share knowledge, share best practices out there. I mean, we've had quite a few cyber attacks already this year. Those that are in the public domain, it's good for them to share what actually happened, so that we can all learn from those situations and scenarios to enable us to be more effective against protecting our organizations as well. And we've talked about best practices in the military around wargaming, around constructive kind of managing of processes, procedures, communication, and just keeping us all kind of secure, and taking some of those best practices into the business world. Chris, is there anything you want to add from that point of view?
No, this is a really fascinating environment, and there's a lot of great case studies out there and examples of things that went awry. And so I would encourage people just to drill down on those, understand those. One of the things I learned in the military as a young officer was you study one battle and dissect it to the nth degree. Mine was the Battle of Chancellorsville in 1863. It was a Civil War battle that had a very small Confederate army under Robert E. Lee against a much larger Union army. And I always was interested in how underdogs, split their forces in the face of the enemy and did crazy things and still were victorious. I think find a cyber attack situation, find something and become the subject matter expert on it. Really understand how that supply chain cyber situation happened. And it's a fun exercise to do. And don't use AI. You have to go do the research yourself. So that's my parting point, is just become the expert on one thing where you can kind of really study it, and that'll interest you in other ones. Not that you have to be the expert in everything, but it really piqued my interest to take battles apart from the points of leadership, tactics, weapons involved, personalities. They all come together in this. And so it's really a pleasure for me to get to be here today with you all. Thanks for inviting me, Alex.
No, it's great to have you here, Chris. And to be fair, I'm going to invite you more, especially for some panel events and supporting what we're trying to do here with supply chain and cybersecurity. Now, to everyone joining us, thank you so much for your time. We hope you've enjoyed this session with some fresh ideas on how to rethink your supply chain strategies with a new level of resilience and readiness, especially with cybersecurity. A little bit of background on us as well. The Supply Chain Academy, we're here for any of your kind of needs or understanding of supply chain. We deliver a number of qualifications, apprenticeships, short courses, consultancy pieces. We just want to help. We want to kind of support you in any way we can. We've got some great new cybersecurity courses coming out, some supply chain kind of educational programs as well. Chris will be on them as well, delivering, as well as my colleague Jamie, who just put on the message there. I just saw that he's not going to be running out of coffee anytime soon. So thanks for that comment, Jamie. Please do take a look at our website, the website that's on our webpage now. And a couple of thank yous. I'd like to say a big thank you to Chris. Thanks so much for joining us. I'd like to say a massive thank you to our producer, Paul McSweeney, who's without him, we couldn't put this presentation together. I'd like to thank Dave Gladden, Head of Marketing, and Aaron Liddell for their support as well as our CEO, Michaela White. So thank you, guys. Until next time, stay prepared, stay agile, and thanks for joining us. Goodbye.
Thank you very much.